Thank you for joining me on The Gospel Truth. I'm your host, Marlon Wilson, and it is once again another debate. And I'm so excited to be able to come before you once again. On The Gospel Truth, we're about engaging the culture with Christian truth. And in that, we do that with lessons, debates, and interviews. And today, like I said before, we have another debate. And this time, we have female conversation about to happen today. This is paramount. This is great things for the gospel truth. Quite too often we only see male interlocutors. We only see males come on the show and they converse and they talk and discuss things. But this time around, we got the females jumping on. So it's all good. It's all good. But before I introduce Scarlett Clay and Jenna Belk, I'm going to go ahead and rehash some of the shows that I have coming up. October 6th at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time has Miles Kettleson. So I'll be coming at y'all not only today, but tomorrow as well with another debate. Miles Kettleson will be debating Taylor Gray. And here they'll be discussing, can atheism account for objective morality? October 9th at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, I have interview. So I'm taking a break from the debates, going to an interview, and his name is Jay Hess, and he's going to be discussing Jehovah's Witness. He's going to be telling us about his former his former belief in Jehovah's Witness and being a Jehovah's Witness, and he'll tell us about his testimony. He's going to tell us about the doctrine of Jehovah's Witnesses, and he's going to tell us how to evangelize Jehovah's Witnesses. So that should be a good show, good informative show. October 15th, I have Aaron Fisher, and he's going to be debating Kevin Thompson. This is a Calvinism debate, an in-house debate. And they're going to be debating, is total depravity biblical and is limited atonement biblical? So there's going to be a long-winded debate there, discussion there. October 16th, I have Anthony Rogers, and this is going to be a great debate. Anthony Rogers and Armin Navabi, they're going to be debating, and they're going to be discussing the value of Christianity. So that's going to be an exciting show right there. But that's just the next 4 shows that are coming up. We have a whole slew of shows coming up. We have a whole bunch of stuff going on in the Gospel Truth. And once again, thank you for your support and everything. And if you can take time right now, take a second. And I want you guys out there to say a prayer for our show. I want you to keep our show in prayer. And also, if you can take time to like and follow the Gospel Truth, share this content. Put this content out there because, as I said, we're about engaging the culture of Christian truth. And in that, man, we have to be able to spread the gospel. God has blessed us with the technology to be able to use it and be able to put it out there. So, use your thumbs while you're looking at your phone or whatever you're looking at, your tabletop, desktop, or laptop. Go ahead, click the share button, share that information, and get it out there so we can spread this gospel to all who need to hear it. All right? But with that said, I'm going to bring in my guests. I'm sure they're going to have a good discussion. Good discussion. I got Scarlett Clay, Jenna Belk. So I friended Scarlett Clay. Scarlett don't know me. She don't know me from Joe down the street. But I friended Scarlett Clay, and she accepted my friendship, and I've been watching her posts and everything, and I'm like, okay. She know her stuff. I seen the shirt she had. She said, I think it says theology. She loves theology or something. I'm like, okay. She loves theology. I'm going to have to ask her if she come on the show. So then I seen Jenna Belk on Atheist Experience. I'm like, oh, shoot, I think we got a show right here. I think we got something going on right here. And so I contacted both of them, and they both decided to come on. And so gracious, so kind, and they decided to come on, and I really do appreciate them. But enough about me talking about them. I'm going to let them talk about themselves. I'm going to let Scarlett come on in, and she's going to introduce herself. And you got it, Scarlett.
Hi. Hi, Marlon. Great to be here. Thanks for having me on the show. My name is Scarlett Clay. I'm a chapter director for the Ratio Christi Christian Apologetics Club at the University of Texas here in Austin. Ratio Christi is a global movement that aims to equip students to defend the Christian faith and follow Jesus. We do that by trying to bring faith and reason together and establish a voice for Christ at the university. And so we do that every week. We have a club meeting down at Parlin Hall at room 203. So if there's any UT students that happen to be listening tonight, or if you know any, we welcome all truth seekers and we'd love to see you there. And I'm also a student myself. I'm in the MDiv program at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary.
All right, thank you, Scarlett. Once again, thank you, Scarlett, for coming on, and I'm excited for the show. I'm excited to have you here, and just thank you, appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right, Jenna, let's go ahead, go for you. Give us a quick introduction.
Hi, I am Jenna Belk, and I was a Catholic for most of my life up until I was about 23. And then I became what I called spiritual because I started having doubts and some things just started to not make sense to me. And so after a couple years of being spiritual, I decided that I really wanted to know for sure if it was reasonable to believe in a God and what kind of evidence we had. So I decided to give the atheists a chance and figure out what they had to say. And I was extremely biased towards Christianity when I first started exploring, and very quickly discovered that and shockingly discovered that I was on the atheist side. And after that, I started developing a curiosity for more and more subjects and things and kind of looking at them in a different way. And since have just discovered a whole new world out there that I'm just fascinated by and excited about. And so I don't have a whole lot of experience with debate or anything like that, but I have started to be a co-host on the Atheist Experience because the things that I've been learning, I guess I've been learning kind of quickly. But essentially, atheism isn't a claim. It isn't a positive claim for anything. It's just us not accepting the claim that Christians make that there is a God. So I'm excited to be here, and thank you for having me, and hopefully we can learn something about each other.
All right, thank you, Jenna. Appreciate you. Yeah, ladies, it's awesome. It's cool. So this is how this is going to work. All right, we're gonna give you two a 10-minute opening, 5 to 10 minute opening, however long you need to take between that 5 to 10 minutes, and then we're going to have about a 60-minute conversation, and then closing statements, and then if the audience has any questions, I'm going to introduce those questions to you two, or I might have some questions if they don't. So sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah, sounds good.
Right, sounds good. Okay, Scarlett, you're up first. You can go ahead and give us your opening statement.
All right. All right, so on tonight's topic, is the Christian epistemologically justified to believe in God? For those who aren't familiar with the term, epistemology refers to the study of knowledge, the study of how we know what we know. And really for this debate tonight, the definition for God is really important. I'll be defending the only God who exists tonight, the one true and living God described in the Westminster Confession. He is spirit, in and of himself, infinite in being, glory, blessedness, and perfection, all sufficient, eternal, unchangeable, incomprehensible, everywhere present, almighty, knowing all things, most wise, most just, most merciful and long-suffering, and abundant in goodness and truth. And so my position is certainly the Christian is epistemologically justified to believe in God because Jesus Christ is the Lord of all knowledge. He makes knowledge possible, and without him, knowledge is unattainable. So I'll expand on that just a little bit. That we can have knowledge at all justifies the Christian's belief in God. God made the universe, tells us that in Genesis 1. Human beings have been bearers of God's image. So we can know some things because God knows all things. So amazingly, there are these sort of essentials of understanding, tools built in both into our minds and into the universe. We could even think of them as transcendent gifts from God. And only the Christian worldview can account for them. Only the Christian can explain why they're there and how they work and why they work the way they do. And so without God, epistemology fails, and nothing really makes sense. Colossians 1:17 tells us that he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And so all things would include knowledge. So I just wanted to offer three illustrations of knowledge that the Christian can account for. And these are things we'd use in real life, everyday experience, okay, to try to make this really plain. All right, let's call it gift number one, okay? Morality, right? So there's standards of right and wrong, and because God exists, we can make sense of these, right? The Bible tells us that God is the creator of everything. So he set up the rules. He made the standards for right and wrong. And there are distinctions of right and wrong shared by all people across places and time and across geographical location that really transcend us. And so God also makes sense of the conscience that we have. It's like a moral compass hardwired into us. And so Romans 2:14 sort of makes reference to this, speaking of unbelief. They show the work of the law is written in their hearts while their conscience bears witness. So the Christian is epistemologically justified to believe in God, and because only his existence explains morality, right? And those words that we use, like should and ought, make sense. Okay, so moral knowledge is a good gift from God. Gift number two, laws of logic. Okay? So we're also required to think logically in general. For example, we know it can't be the case that we're on the Gospel Truth Show tonight, and also the case that we're not on the Gospel Truth Show tonight, and no one has to argue for that or persuade us of that. We know that because we think logically and realize that these fundamental laws of logic, they work, right? They exist and they work. Christians can think logically because the God who created us is logical. So all truth comes from his mind, and we're born ready to think logically. And so the Christian is epistemologically justified to believe in God because God makes sense of the laws of logic. Logic reflects his thinking. Okay? And then finally, this third gift I wanted to mention is the uniformity of nature. And this is an amazing gift that I think both Christians and non-Christians really take for granted. But this is the idea that the future will be like the past. Okay, and so a great analogy I heard Greg Bahnsen, who's a well-known apologist from a few decades back, said that we expect our toothpaste to come out of the tube, right? When we squeeze it tomorrow, just like it came out of the tube this morning, demonstrates that we're epistemologically justified to believe in God. And of course, this is referring a bit to David Hume's problem of induction. He said there's no reason to think that the future should resemble the past. But because God exists, the Christian worldview solves this dilemma, effortlessly. God who created the universe, he upholds it by the word of his power, as Hebrews says in chapter 1, uniformity that we can count on, sort of like this law-like, consistent universe that allows us to explore it, right? And so, Einstein has this famous quote, right? He said, the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it's comprehensible, right? To which the Christian can add, that's because our incomprehensible God made it that way, right? And gave us the ability to comprehend it. And so without the uniformity of nature, scientific knowledge wouldn't be possible. All right, so these are just three examples. We can see from these that God sort of provided a groundwork for knowledge. He's given us the moral knowledge, the laws of logic, the uniformity of nature. There's quite a few more, but I'm just going to stick to those for now. And so these are not on the level really of evidence like we typically argue. This really on the level of the presuppositions that we come to the evidence with. It's more of worldview, right? On the level of worldview, right? So And it's only because we're made in his image, right, that we can distinguish, fantasy from reality, right? It's only with the presuppositions that God exists that we can know that we're not Alice in Wonderland, right, like tumbling down the rabbit hole. All right, so only because God designed the world to be known can the human mind know it. And so because God exists, knowledge is possible.
All right, Scarlett. That's it, Scarlett. You good?
All right.
All right. Thank you,
Yes,
Scarlett.
sir. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. All right, Jenna, you got it.
Can I do a response to that, or do I need to do my own thing?
Yeah, you can. You can respond to hers during the 60-minute conversation, and then right now it's just an opening statement.
Okay, so basically, like Scarlett said, epistemology is basically the study of how we know what we know. And I have actually found this subject incredibly fascinating because I had never heard of it as a Christian, so it's interesting that way. But basically, when I think about how I know anything, I have to take evidence into account, and I have to basically use that evidence to determine if it's verifiable, if it's consistent, if it's true. I don't believe that the Bible does that because it's one source of information that I just don't find reliable. There's so many things in the Bible that we have found not to be true that I think discredits it. So when we think of not having any kind of Bible to refer to, when we think of how do we verify anything? We have to have multiple places to find it to verify if it's true or not. I don't know if that makes any sense. Sorry. But yeah, the atheism is just the negation of the claim that there is a God. I have looked for answers. I have looked in the Bible. I've asked many different people, Christians, non-Christians, and I just don't accept it. I just don't find it to be true. So that's kind of the atheist position.
All right, Jenna, appreciate you. All right. So thank you two for your opening statements. Appreciate you both. So now we're going to go into the 60-minute discussion portion of this conversation of this show. And so you guys going to be self-moderators. All right. So I'm not going to step in and interrupt or anything. You have it. Go for it.
Awesome. Scarlett, you want to start?
Okay. Sure. Yeah. Just going off of what you said, just now you said that when you are looking at certain claims, you have to use or you have to look at the evidence. Okay. And you, I think you mentioned that you have to verify evidence. And so I guess what I would ask you though is what tools you're bringing to the evidence to interpret it. Because that's what I'm interested in, is what you're using when you come to the evidence to make sense of it.
What am I using when I come to the evidence? To determine if it's evidence or to determine if the evidence is good evidence?
To interpret it. Yeah, to make sense of it, to decide whether it's true or false, reliable or not reliable. Yeah, just, what are you using? Okay. And then where would you get the justification for logic with your worldview?
Where do I get the justification for logic?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of how do we know that logic works, right?
Yeah, it's just sort of, logic is this really incredible thing because it's not physical, right? So, the challenge really for the atheist is to sort of come up with where it came from and how we use it. So I was wondering what you thought about that and what your thoughts were, about logic, since you're saying that's something you use.
Mm-hmm. So, logic was discovered a couple thousand years ago, and So I mean, that's where it came from. I think that we kind of you know what? I'm not a historian. Um,
Okay.
I'm also very new to using logic. So I've learned about logical fallacies, and it's interesting because I'm kind of learning backwards. Like, I found out that I used basically fallacious thinking. If you look up logical fallacies, you know how there's, the ad
Yes, there's a
hoc and
long list. Yes.
yeah. So I looked those up and I found out that I used basically as many of those as you can imagine to
Yes.
justify
Yeah.
my belief in a God, because I had never really asked myself before why I believed in a God. And when I started doing that, and at the same time I started learning about fallacies, I discovered that I was using those fallacies to justify my belief. And so that kind of broke it down pretty quickly. And so just to be honest, I am not an expert in logic. I am studying it and trying to learn it as I go, but I am fairly new to all of this. So as far as logic goes, I learned what I'm learning what fallacies are and how to tell when somebody is
Mhm.
using fallacious thinking, and so that's kind of how I use logic so far.
Okay, so yeah, and I can relate to that because I've looked up the list of fallacies and I read through them and inevitably I say, "Oh my goodness, I did that the other day," or "Yes, I just said that to my kids this morning," or something.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I can relate to that. So again, the challenge I think for the atheist is to give an account for those, because the more you think about logic, and I know as you'll continue to study, you'll you know you have to ask where they came from, because they can't be dependent on our minds. Minds disagree. They can't be dependent on each person's subjectivity, because they're invariant, right? They don't seem to change. Logic seems to work in different places, in different people groups. At least those three fundamental laws that we usually are talking about, like the law of non-contradiction, right? Like that we can't be on this show and not on this show at the same time, that kind of thing. So it seems like when you look at it, that we're hardwired with the ability to think logically, and that the laws of logic are already sort of put in place as a structures to make sense of things. So that's why I was just wondering if you had thought about that at all. And
Yeah,
of course, my
that's
position is
interesting.
going to be that they came from God. Of course, is my position, that they're grounded in His nature, and that He thinks logically, so that we can also do that.
That's interesting. So you're saying that all humans automatically think logically?
In general, right? In general, we don't get up and think, that things aren't going to be, like the example of, well, it sort of overlaps a little bit with uniformity of nature, but basically we all generally know that logic works, right? We don't actually have to take a logic class to think logically, as far as like the really basics. For example, as I'm talking to you, I know that you're Jenna Belk and not someone else who's not Jenna Belk. Do you see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So that fundamental logic that really doesn't have to be taught, to be hardwired into us.
Okay, that's interesting. Sorry. Um,
Okay.
so I agree. So if there are different levels of logic, I'll go with that and say that yes, there is a basic level in the sense that we agree that I'm not here and somewhere else at the same time. So yes, I'll give you that. But as far as the more specific fallacies, I don't think that comes naturally. I think that is something you have to study, and I'd agree that it is consistent, no matter how you use it. I mean, if you use it the right way, I guess. But yeah, so I don't think that that we are born with that. I think that is something you do have to learn, at least through experience or through using it or through learning about it. I just don't think that comes naturally. I don't know why you would think that. Also, as far as where it comes from, I mean, I don't know where it comes from. I don't know how you get to the claim that a God is logical or uses it or gave it to us. I honestly just don't understand how you get to that conclusion.
Okay. Right. So the Christian perspective or the Christian worldview is that God is logical, right? That all truth comes from his mind and logical in him. He doesn't contradict himself. Like the scriptures say, he is not a man that he should lie. He's not the author of confusion. And then so, the scriptures present God to us as logical. Okay, and so then you just take it one step after that and say, well, if we're made in his image, then it makes sense that we also think logically. And then, of course, because his nature is transcendent, he is spirit, then that would make sense that these laws are also immaterial. And so it seems to make sense when you put it all together. And that's, why I was just going to kind of press you a bit on that, since you said you were coming to the evidence, and since you're interested in logic. It's sort of getting, below the evidence and asking, well, how does that, how are you using logic?
So, but how do you know, you're saying that, assuming that God is logical, then that would mean, since we are made in his image, that means that we're logical. But I'm wondering how you get to, how you know, because I understand that the Christian position might be God is logical, but how do you know that?
Mm-hmm.
That's that first step.
How do we know that God is logical?
Right.
Okay. Well, I would say from the Bible, this is how he reveals himself to us. And then I know the next question would be how we know the Bible is true. And that would be because nothing actually can make sense if it's not. If God doesn't exist, epistemology is not possible. That there's no way we can know things. And that's, just being, oh, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. You just said that, what did you just say? I'm so sorry.
Yeah, so if we could, maybe it might be helpful to look at your worldview on atheism, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but on atheism, you are sort of accepting the view that the brain, for example, has evolved over millions of years to be what it is today. Is that right? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but
yeah, I'll go with that. Yeah.
Okay, right. So there's no reason to think that a random cosmic accident over millions of years has produced a brain that can think at all. It seems even less feasible to think that laws of logic, which are immaterial, could have come about. And so it's just sort of looking at atheism going, where could you even get that? Where could you get immaterial laws from? And then how could you get a mind that could think logically as well?
So basically, just starting off, atheism doesn't make any claims other than, I don't accept your claim. Right? So that's the atheist position. But if we're talking about my specific position, and if you're wondering how I know, or how can I explain that logic works without a God to make it work, I would say I've been learning a lot about, have you ever heard of big history?
Big history? No, I don't think so.
Apparently it's a relatively new subject, but it covers basically history from the Big Bang to today. So it kind of encounters, astronomy and geography and biology and just all these different pieces. And I have found that is one of my favorite new subjects because it just covers so many things and it answers so many things. So when we think about where we came from and how we formed into a brain from essentially nothing, all you have to do is learn about how quarks turn into atoms, which turn into elements, which turn into stars, which turn into supernovas, which turn into, I mean, there's a chain reaction to things. And so it's actually very fascinating to learn about how the elements make up everything that you see in the natural world. And so it's interesting how somebody can claim that there is something outside of that. Does that make sense?
That does make sense, but then I would have to come right back and press you again and say no one's ever seen any evidence for any of those chains that you've just said. No one's ever seen anything arise. At least there's been anything or not. I don't think anyone's, I'm not sure I remember all the things you said, but a quark turning into a star. You know, these are claims, but I don't think they're scientific because no one's seen them. I think they're speculations. I mean, has anyone seen that happen?
As far as somebody seeing that happen, I don't think that. So I haven't, I know that there are many scientists, like a lot of scientists that agree on this, and this has been approved to be in curriculum. I guess it's interesting. I guess I'll have to do a little bit more research on how we know that. But I wonder how you can be confused about that, but not confused about your claim that it came from a God. So I'm saying, I think personally, not as an atheist, but as Jenna, I think that it came from molecules and particles and elements. But you're saying that it came from a God. I see a lot more evidence for particles and elements than I do for anything even resembling anything like a God. So while I can say that I don't know for sure, I can't say for 100% sure that any of that happened. But even if I was, I wouldn't base a worldview on it. Does that make sense?
That you wouldn't base it on
where it came from, or where we came from.
Right. So I mean, it sounds to me like, and I know you've been looking at the fallacies. It sounded like you might possibly be making the ad populum fallacy there, where if a large number of scientists say something's true, then we're true. And of course, that's just fallacious to say that. Yes, I agree with you, though. The vast majority of scientists are going to say that, but that doesn't mean that it's correct. And I hope you agree with that.
I agree. Yes, I did use that fallacy. Thank you for catching that.
Yeah. So if I could address what you said, why you would say, that you would, I guess, you would think it's okay to rely on the scientist, and yet I just sort of say that it's from God. And I just wanted to make maybe an observation of how that's different, because I know to a lot of people that might seem the same. And so when we reason back to our own minds, right, or to our own finite understanding, then that's just circular, right? That's just begging the question. You're kind of assuming what you're trying to prove before you start, because you're just arguing in a circle. Does that make sense? So
no,
the scientist says this, so I believe this. Well, why do you believe this? Because the scientist says it. And why does the scientist says it? Because the scientist believes it. Does that make sense?
I think it's just that the scientists are better at finding evidence for it than I am.
Okay.
I think that they have found evidence for it.
Right, but then what I'm going to say again is to go below the level of evidence, like to go down to the groundwork and say, what presuppositions are they bringing to the evidence? Because one of the things, and I don't think a lot of people understand this, the Christian scientists and the atheist scientists have the same evidence. They have the same fossils. They have the same astronomical measurements. They have the same instruments. It's not as if, the Christian scientists are, in a cave somewhere, with a big, outdated technology. Christian scientists and atheistic scientists same evidence. It's just a matter of how they interpret it, and it's all going to matter. What lenses you're looking through, right? You've probably heard that metaphor, right? If you've got Christian lenses on, you're going to interpret that evidence according to biblical worldview, whereas the atheist scientist has his atheistic glasses on, and he's going to interpret it that way. Okay?
I don't know what
Does that make
atheistic
sense?
glasses are. I don't know what an atheist worldview is.
So it would just be, it would just be one where God is not needed, right, to explain anything.
Well, it's not that God isn't
explained.
needed, it's that you think a God exists and I don't believe that. That's all that atheists say. So as far as an atheist worldview, there really isn't one.
Okay, but I hear atheists make a lot of claims. Right? I mean, you started off making a claim, right? That you verify evidence, and that you have to get multiple sources to verify evidence. So these are claims. As I understand them, I think it would be really hard to have a worldview never make a claim about anything, or a positive claim about anything. It sounded to me like you were, but I could be mistaken.
So that's my worldview, but that doesn't mean that it is an atheist worldview.
Okay. All right. Yeah, and I'm not familiar. I think I've heard that there are several different definitions of atheist, and I definitely don't know. I just know that there's atheism, like a hard atheism that says there is no God. Then there's going to be like an agnostic atheism that says I don't really know for sure. And so, yeah, I'm not sure.
I don't know. I just know that
Okay.
So the thing is that terminology kind of changes according to how we use it. And so, for example, if I were to want to know what it means to be a Christian, I'd probably ask a Christian. And the thing is that, yes, no matter who you ask, whether you're asking a Christian what the Christian worldview is, or you're asking an atheist what the atheist worldview is, you're going to get a different answer every time. And so if we're going to narrow it down to just, do Christians believe in a God? And they say yes, then I'm going to say, as an atheist, I don't accept that, because I haven't found the evidence. So if we were going to talk about scientists finding things and you say that they have the same evidence, you're right, they have the same evidence. But the conclusions that they're coming to is that we have evidence that for evolution, and I don't know where the evidence is for any kind of God, because there are many, many people who claim this God or that God or that God or whatever, but nobody has any evidence as far as, anything other than personal experience or the Bible, which I think that you would agree, personal experience is a little rocky when it comes as evidence, right?
Right. Yeah, definitely. I'm probably a little bit different than a lot of apologists. I don't believe anyone when they say they're an atheist. I don't believe an atheist, and God doesn't either.
Wait.
Deep.
You don't believe that I'm an atheist?
No, ma'am, I sure don't.
Why?
Well, because the scriptures say that everyone knows God. And what we do is we suppress it. A really good analogy is like if you have a beach ball, when you've been to the pool, it's kind of fun, especially when you're kids, if you ever have beach balls and you try to push them down under the water, right? And you try to hold them down, and it's actually really hard, right? Inevitably, it pops up. And so what happens is when someone says they don't believe in God, what's really happening is, you're suppressing the truth, right? Holding it down. But inevitably, at some point, it's going to pop back up again. And I would just note that it already popped up with you when you made a claim that you needed to verify evidence, because you're not able to verify evidence with logic. And then, of course, you can't account for logic. So it's sort of like that truth popping up. So I would just say God doesn't believe in atheists. And, I think in our knower, my grandmother used to say, in your knower. deep down, and we suppress it because we're fugitives from God's justice, right? We're sinners. We don't want to face him because we've done a bunch of bad stuff. And let me tell you something. If you and I, Jenna, were to get a stack of like blank notebooks and start writing down the stuff we've done wrong, I guarantee you, my friend, my stack would be higher than yours. Okay. And so we suppress that because we don't want to be accountable. And so that's why I say I don't believe in atheist, because I've done it.
So you're saying that I don't want to be accountable for things that I believe I've done wrong, and so therefore I'm just ignoring the truth?
Yeah, that's what we do. In Romans chapter 1, it says, and I like to put, personal names in the quote that, that God has made it plain, to Jenna, right? He has shown Jenna, right, through creation that he exists. And so we're without excuse.
But he hasn't.
Right?
He hasn't shown me anything.
Right. He hasn't. Well, let's look at the three things I mentioned. We can look again at morality, the laws of logic, and the uniformity of nature. If you even wanted to go beyond what I said in my opening statement, I'm an artist. I love art. One of my favorite places to go is the museum. And aesthetics and the appreciation of beauty also can't be accounted for on an atheistic worldview without God.
But why do you think that it has to be accounted for?
Why do I think it has to be accounted for? Because we're rational beings. We generally think the world needs to make sense. It's sort of like we don't allow people to smuggle in their assumptions without accounting for them. A lot of apologists will say it's kind of like stealing. I don't know that I particularly like that example, but we'll go ahead and go with it. The atheists are Bible lifters, right? They lift values and ideas and concepts from the Bible and smuggle it over to their side and use it while denying God at the same time. And so, that would be an example, the laws of logic, right? That was kind of trying to be smuggled over. Does that make sense?
Not really, because I think that you can have logic without a God, and I would say that the evidence for that is the fact that I understand that logic works. I agree with you there, and I don't think there's a God. I don't believe that. I don't see any evidence for it. So for you to say that that's true, I would think that you would have to demonstrate what logic would look like with and without a God in order to show that that that's the case.
Right. Well, so what I'm doing is I'm saying you can't show me a law of logic, right? You can't hand it to me, right? You can't give me one. Like if I was to say, Jenna, can you please hold up a law of logic so that we can see it?
With an abstract concept.
It is. I agree with you. And so that's what I'm saying is atheism can't account for abstract objects. In fact, they don't usually believe in abstract objects at all. They'll deny their existence. So I know Matt Dillahunty denies the existence of abstract objects.
He doesn't deny the existence of abstract concepts, which logic is. And he's a firm believer in logic. As am I.
Right. So all I'm asking for is, how do you account for those things? Again, they're the universal invariant laws. They can't be dependent on a mind. They're not physical. They work. We continue to use them. And the fundamental laws we don't have to be taught. And so, I think it is incumbent upon the atheist to provide some explanation for where those come from, along with many other things too.
The interesting thing is, from my knowledge about life and how things work, it's that we have things that happen around us, and then we as humans try to make sense of them. And our brains are really good at making sense out of things that that aren't even true, right? So, for example, when you look through a screen door, right? your brain can look around the lines, right? So you can make sense of it, even though there's something in your way. So I think that that's just a human thing to want to make sense of things. And I think that it is human to want to say, yes, I know that God is the reason that this works. But when we really look at it and we look at how do you know that, I don't understand where your evidence for that claim is. And I also don't understand why you think that an atheist has to come up with an alternative answer, because that's a fallacy as well, is if it's not this, then what else? What else is it, right?
Right, and so that's why a lot of atheists will just deny reality, right? They'll say, "Well, I'm not really sure. I could breathe,
How is that?
A brain,
How is saying
a
I'm not
brain in
sure
a jar."
denying reality?
Well, because the correspondence theory of truth says that truth corresponds with reality, right? So if you can't know what's real, then you can't know what's true, and if you can't know what's true, you can't have knowledge. That's sort of the way that works.
But saying I don't know where it came from doesn't mean that you don't know that it's there. We know that it's there. We know that it works. We don't know where it originated from, like who, made it work. That's not ignoring reality. That's saying I don't know where it came from. That's all.
Okay. Right. Okay. Yeah, and you can say I don't know, and I'm going to say, that Christianity tells you, right? It provides
and
a really great response. But back to the brain though, I really do want to ask you and press you a bit on that. When you really think about it, okay, when you hold this idea of evolution in your mind, knowing that nobody's happened, okay, especially chemical evolution, non-living to living, non-conscious to conscious, does that make sense to you? Because the Christian can make sense of consciousness, and how do you explain it?
I can't explain it.
Okay.
And I don't think that we have to in order to be conscious. Evidence.
Okay. Okay. All right. Yeah. Well, what about, we could go to morals and morality. That was another one of those, I'm just calling them transcendent gifts because I really see them like that. God didn't have to think. He could have put us here in the dark. He could have put us here, any number of ways. He could have put us here where we can never know anything and always be fumbling about. But he seems to have put us here with these incredible preconditions, right, of intelligibility, where, like Einstein said, where we can sense the universe, and we shouldn't be able to do that if we evolved. We shouldn't be able to do that, but yet we do, right?
I mean,
that
just because Einstein said that we shouldn't be able to do that, do you believe it right away?
No, it's not because he says it. I mean, I like that quote because it confirms what scripture says, and most people think of Einstein as a brilliant man. I think we would agree he was, a brilliant scientist, and so I like that quote because, even those who don't believe in God or deny his existence get it right sometimes, right, in spite of themselves, and I think he really did.
But liking that quote, does that make it true?
No, no, absolutely not.
Okay.
Yeah. So did you have any ideas about, I don't see how you can justify any of the three things I mentioned with an evolutionary idea of how things came about. So I'm just curious, do you have any ideas about that?
I think that morals is actually a fascinating subject as well, because I've discovered that I don't think that there's an objective morality. I think that we all come to our own interpretation of what we believe is moral. And that comes from social learning, that comes from being passed down through our ancestors, that comes from cultural things, so it kind of when you ask somebody in one part of the country, you know, what's right when it comes to this, and you ask somebody in a different part of the world what's right when it comes to this, you might get different answers, and it probably depends on something like their friends, their family, you know, people that they know, people that they've learned, teachers, things like that. So I think that just comes from us.
Yeah, well, I would agree with you. There are definitely some morals that differ from culture to culture, but I would also, you know, encourage you to recognize there are some what I would call objective moral absolutes that don't differ and that don't change and that have been the same over time. You know, Christian apologists will often use these symbolic examples to sort of drive home the point. You know, for example, everyone, you know, at every time and every place has known that, you know, torturing a baby to death just for the fun of it is wrong. And so there are certain moral absolutes like that. And we could just go to the Ten Commandments, really, like unjustified taking of a life, lying.
You want to go with the Ten Commandments?
Cheating on your spouse. Well, because, you know, I agree with you. There are some things like, you know, in some countries it's moral, it's the right thing to do to bow to someone, meet them, and in another country it's not. So there are some that are subjective. That doesn't explain the ones that aren't.
I'm sorry, you're breaking up.
Our moral. I'm sorry, that doesn't explain the morals that aren't.
I'm so sorry. You're gonna have to rewind a little bit. You broke up quite a bit there.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Oh, now I can.
Okay, yeah. So I was just saying that I agree with you that some morals change, you know, from culture to culture, but there's some that don't. And so the Christian can account for those because God has set up the rules for us to abide by. But, you know, on an atheist worldview, I don't know how you can account for those types of things. You know,
I'd say that we've set them up over time. As humans,
okay.
we've come to agree on things like very, very deep things like that. And as we branch out, yes, we may disagree on some more minor things as you go down the chain. But I think that that's something that we all agreed on. And if you look at history, they have changed over time. You know, it used to be a few thousand years ago, it used to be okay to kill somebody if they stole from you. You know, it used to be okay to do this and it used to be okay to do that. And things are changing. So I'm just wondering how you can make the claim that there's like this objective reality that about morals that God provided to you, but also explain that it's changed completely over time.
Okay, so then you'd say, you know, like the hyperbolic example I gave you, you know, torturing a baby just for fun is wrong now, but in 100 years it could be okay.
No, that's not what I said at all.
Well, I'm just trying to understand if they can change, if they're subjective and dependent upon culture, then they all be subject to change.
Well, for example, do you think that homosexuality is a sin?
Absolutely, yes. Mm-hmm.
Right. And so if you look at history, a long time ago, the majority of the world may have agreed with you. But if you look at today, a majority of the world will disagree. So it changes based on what the people determine, and we all kind of essentially vote on what we agree to be better for us. You know, when you look at any kind of species, any kind of living thing, the goal is to survive and reproduce. And so in order for that to happen and succeed, the best way to do that, we can agree, is not to torture babies.
Yeah, well, and homosexuality would be rolled out on that view as well, wouldn't it?
Why?
Because homosexuals don't reproduce.
That doesn't mean that they can't raise a child. They can't continue the human race.
All right, I think we're going a little bit too far off subject. Let's try to stay on the subject case.
Okay. So as far as morals changing, what you would find on the issue you brought up, though, is that, you know, a Bible-believing church, okay, that still believes that the Bible is true and hasn't changed on that standard, not on the issue of homosexuality or any other cultural issue.
Yeah.
You'll still find churches that do. And so again, it's the fallacy of, the bandwagon fallacy, just because everyone is doing something or promoting something, right, or saying that it's okay, doesn't make it true or false, right? And so that's, why, again, the Christian worldview is so consistent, because we can go to it and we can say, okay, why is it this way? And why should it stay this way? And we have a God who set up the universe in a consistent way. He's given us moral laws. He's given us laws of logic. And so it sort of makes sense of all of our thinking. And I think it's really hard to account for knowledge, if we want to get back to our subject, account for knowledge without it. And that would include moral knowledge. How would you account for the fact that, there are those sort of stubborn moral absolutes that don't seem to change?
Yeah, I agree that it's not good to torture babies. Does that mean that every single person in the history of the world has thought that? I don't know. I just don't. It's simple. Like, I just simply don't accept your claim that it came from a God. I don't know how you get there. I just don't know how you get there.
Right. Well, okay. And that's fine. I'm presenting the fact that the Christian can have an epistemological justification. Okay. So the fact that I can account for morals would be part of that justification.
Well, but I mean, I could say that morals came from fairies. And I have a book in my room that says that it came from fairies. I think that is equally as justified as you saying that it came from a God, which is not.
But that's just coming from your own mind. There's no reason why we should believe that. Right. So the difference, though, is I'm appealing to a transcendent source. I'm not just appealing to my own mind. I'm just saying, this is true because my isolated mind says so.
How are you appealing to a transcendent source?
Because I'm appealing to God, who is transcendent. And as my definition in the intro, he is spirit, right? In and of himself, infinite, right? So he is outside of us. And so I avoid that sort of vicious circle of reasoning, back to my own mind, because I'm breaking out of that vicious circle and appealing to a transcendent source, right? Does that make sense?
I don't know how you know that the transcendent source is there.
Right, because without him, knowledge isn't possible. That's what
another
I'm trying
claim
to show.
That I don't know how you got there. I don't know how you can prove that. And I like to prove things that I say that I know. And so when I don't know something, I either say that I don't know it, which I actually say a lot now, because I realize there's a lot that I don't know. And if I think that I have an answer to something, then I'll say I think it's this, and there may be times where I may go with it. And and at a time I did think that it came from a God, and I went with it, and my life was fine. But when I ultimately wanted to find out if there was hard evidence, if there was any logical reasoning, if there was any kind of proof, I found nothing. So I don't know how you're epistemologically justified if you don't have any evidence.
Right. So, and you just appealed to logic again. And so then I would press you again to give an account for laws of logic. As a Christian, I can give an account for those. Again, the God who created us in his image is logical and gave us the ability to think logically. You can reject that. You can say that sounds crazy. God gave you free will to reject that. But what I'm saying is, at least I can account for it. I can make sense of it.
You can claim to make sense of it, and you can claim to account for it. You can claim that it came from a God, but I don't know how you can prove it.
Okay, I can prove it by the impossibility of the contrary. It can't be otherwise. We can't know anything.
I don't know how you can prove that.
Okay, it's going below the evidence, right, and getting down on that groundwork, right? So when we
I don't know
come
what that
to
means.
evidence,
I'm sorry.
whatever it is, yeah. So I'm trying to think. Okay, let's just think about it. What if I used an analogy like you and I were going to go to an art exhibit?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're gonna go maybe down to the Blanton Museum down at the University of Texas. Okay, and we're gonna see an exhibit. Okay, in order for us to go enjoy that exhibit, there's some things that we have to have before we even go in. Okay, and
Wow,
I
like
hope
what?
this analogy. Okay, so well, for one thing, we're gonna have to have laws of logic that work. Okay, because we're going to have to know that it's this exhibit we plan to see and not another exhibit that's not the exhibit we plan to see. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
does that make sense? Okay, and then we go in and we're going to have to actually know that our senses are reliable. Okay, that I can actually rely on my eyes and my ears, that we can enjoy the art and actually know that what we're seeing is representative of the art that's on the wall.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to have morality, because there's a lot of the pieces of art where, you know, the artist is going to be making some moral claims, you know, especially in the contemporary galleries. They're going to have some pieces that are making some very strong moral statements, you know, in their work. And so we have to have moral knowledge going into that gallery to be able to make sense of what that artist is doing, to make sense of his compositions, to make sense of his color choices and all that. We have to have laws of mathematics. As we go in, you know, we stand, say you and I are standing in front of a really, you know, large work, and there's going to be a distance that we have to stand from that work. You know, if we're too close, we're just going to see brush strokes. If we're back further, you know, we'll miss the detail. But we get right into that sweet spot of vision that's actually governed by laws of perspective, which are mathematical. So laws of math actually have to be in place before we go in there. And then the uniformity of nature, as I mentioned, actually has to be in place before we go into the museum. We have to know that, you know, when we push the button to go up the elevator to see the special exhibit, that the elevator is going to open just like it did last time. So I don't know if that analogy helps, but it's sort of like we've got to have these things going in.
Right.
To
yeah,
the evidence.
I'm with you there.
Okay. And that's why I didn't want to come tonight and like just play ping pong with evidence, because, you know, I could give you some awesome bibliographic evidence about the reliability of our manuscripts for the New Testament, right? Impressive stuff. Okay, I really could. I manage 4 Torah scrolls that traveled the country. I could give you some incredible evidence for the scribal transmission process of the Old Testament. Impressive stuff. Okay, but whatever I give you, I think that you would dismiss it. And so what I wanted to do was to sort of go beneath the evidence and try to look at the presuppositions, those things that you come to the evidence with, and how you give account for those. And so I'm just saying that the Christian can give an account for those things. And I'm just asking you to consider the fact that atheism is unable to do that.
I don't think that it's atheist's job to come up with answers. I think that the atheist claim is simply, you've made a claim and I don't believe it. I have looked into it, and I've listened to people like you for my whole life, and I did believe it for a long time. And the more that I learned, the less I believed it, and that made me an atheist right away. So again, there's no answers that atheism provides. It's simply saying, I don't believe it.
Right.
And
well,
I
okay,
don't.
well, yeah. Well, I would imagine those that watch the atheist experience think that they're getting answers, right? I think they tune in because they think they're getting answers to things.
So in a
that
way,
they
yeah.
want to hear.
When Matt's on, he's really good about breaking down logic and explaining it in a way that people can understand. I've learned quite a bit from him, but I am nowhere near as fluent as he is in those in that way. But as far as the atheist experience goes, it's just an atheist experience. So basically anybody can call in with any kind of claim about anything supernatural, be it gods or fairies or mermaids or anything, and say, I believe that this is real, And we say, okay, why? And we try to look at the evidence that they can provide, because I don't know how you can look underneath evidence for a God. I mean, I don't know. I don't understand that. But
Okay.
yeah, we ask for the evidence that
Well,
these people have, and nobody has ever come up with anything. So
um, so can I ask you a quick question? I don't know how we're doing on time, but I did have a question for you. I was listening, and I haven't been able to listen to as many of the shows as I wanted to, but I was listening to one dated August 25th, and you were on the Atheist Experience with your friend V.
Mhm.
And you were saying that memories are not reliable. And I wrote down this quote here. You said that every time we remember something, we remember it differently. If you think you have some sort of opinion, you start telling all of your friends and you tell it 50,000 times. And every time you tell it, it gets a little more dramatic. And then V said she compared it to a fish story. Okay, and so I guess I would have to ask you, when I was watching the show and heard you say that, I would just have to ask why then we should believe your deconversion story.
why you should believe my deconversion story?
Mm-hmm. I mean,
You don't
if
have
that's
to.
true. Okay, I mean, I was just wondering if the memory is not reliable, um, what part of that should we assume is true or is not true, or
So when we make claims about memories and history and things like that, I think that we have to agree that certain things will be true and certain things won't be true. But the thing is that if I were to say that my deconversion story is evidence that there is no God, it's not.
Mhm.
It's just a story about something that happened to me, and I'm sharing that with you. Could I be completely fabricating it? I could. But when we look at my history with people and talking to people, so far, I mean, I've tried to be honest. I hope I've been honest, and people tend to believe me. So that's kind of evidence for I tend to be an honest person. So let's take it on that. But I say that that's evidence that there's no God. No,
Okay,
it's not strong enough evidence
all
for
right,
anything like that.
okay, all right.
I'm so
Um,
sorry, you're breaking up. I'm not
let's
sure if
see,
you're talking right now.
oh, sorry. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Mhm.
I have another question, but if you have one for me, we can take turns. I don't want to take all the time.
Oh, no, sure. Actually,
Okay.
yeah. I did have a question. When you, in your opening statement, um, you said God knows all things,
Mhm.
right?
Yes, that's part of
Hello?
the answer to question 7 in the Westminster Catechism. Yeah, can you hear me? Sorry, I don't know what's going on. Can you hear me okay? Okay.
I
Can
can
you
hear
hear
you
me
now. I'm
okay? Uh-oh,
sorry.
now I can't hear you. Okay, yeah, I lost you there for a second.
Yeah, it's getting kind of
Come
choppy.
on,
I'm sorry about
technology.
that.
Okay, okay. Yes,
I,
so yes, I had said he knows all things. That was part of the Westminster Confession, and the definition for who is God, question 7 in that confession. That,
So wait, so how do you know that God knows all things?
um, I know God knows all things because the Bible tells me that he knows all things. Yeah.
So do you believe everything that's in the Bible?
Do I believe everything that's in the Bible? Yes, I believe it is inerrant and without error, in the original documents. And it's reliable. Yeah, it's testing. Scripture attests itself, but really the best proof for the Bible is, again, knowledge wouldn't be possible if it's not true. Again, back to our topic. If the Bible wasn't true, if God didn't make the world, if he didn't make us and put us in it, then there's no reason to think that we have anything any contact with reality, that we have anything or any reason to have confidence in our brains. There's no
So why
reason we
would you
should
think
believe.
that though? I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm really bad about interrupting. I hope I'm not
No,
upsetting you.
it's okay.
But I'm just
No,
curious, when you say that that means that we would have no reason to believe this, I'm just wondering, how do you know, like why do you say that?
so I say that because I am taking the evolutionary account of human origins at its word. Okay, and I guess I'll just leave the word atheist out of this, but on the evolutionary mindset, we evolved from non-living matter, right? And you know how people they use all kinds of words to describe it. We evolved from pond scum, we evolved from single-celled organisms or whatever. I actually have, this is kind of funny, but my son loves to do science experiments. Okay, so he has this one. I found this one in the pantry, and I thought, can you see? I don't know if you can you see that?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, and so it's fizzing compounds, right? And it's just one of those where you mix vinegar and baking soda, right? And they fizz over. And so really, if I'm to take the evolutionists at their word, then the human brain wouldn't be that different from a fizzing compound in that it is just chemical reactions taking place. Okay? And so the question then would be, how can you get laws of logic from fizzing compounds, right? Or how can you get morals from fizzing compounds? And this is simplistic, I know, but it's I'm trying to communicate the idea. And so that's why I say that, is because there's no reason to think that chemical reactions would do that. Chemicals don't think. Chemicals don't make choices.
So that's the thing, is that specific compound is baking soda and vinegar. We are not made up of anything nearly as simple as that. It's incredibly, significantly more complex, which is
Right.
where you get the justification for life. The fact that it is significantly more complex. The more complex you get, that's the closer you get to life. And this is the most complex thing that we know of.
Okay. Right. And yet no one has ever observed life coming from non-life.
Right, because it takes millions of years.
But nobody knows that, right? So nobody's seen it. So, we can say that, but would you agree, though, that that's not a scientific claim because it can't be observed and it can't be repeated?
Do you accept that we came from the Big Bang? That the Big Bang started the universe?
No.
Oh, you don't
No,
accept the Big Bang theory?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, there's no. I don't see any reason to think there's the Big Bang. Cosmology is correct.
Oh, wow.
I know that's
okay.
rare, but I don't. Yeah, I don't. No.
Okay.
Again, because I think a Big Bang would still get you fizzing compounds in your brain, and I agree with you, it is more complex than that, but you still don't get the kinds of things that we're saying. You don't get conscious, again, you don't get free will from fizzing compounds. You don't get morals. You don't get uniformity of nature. You don't get the appreciation of art, especially from fizzing compounds. So I think that's the thing I would press you on, is to really think, does that make sense? I like I said, I could give you all these incredible information about intelligent design. I caught a little bit of your talk with Jonathan McClatchy, and of course he's so brilliant, right? I mean, he knows so much about biology. I don't know any of that stuff. I mean, I'm blown away by the stuff that he was saying. But what I noticed, Jenna, was that he was giving you these infinitesimally small, remote possibilities of the information we have in DNA and the cosmological constants, and you just sort of dismissed it. So that's why I agree with you that it's complex, but when we look at that complexity, that doesn't seem to make a difference either.
I mean, I don't know where to go with that. I'm sorry.
Okay. All right. So I have another question for you if we've still got
Okay.
a little bit of time. I don't know how we're doing. I was listening to you on another show. It really caught my attention because you were talking about suicide. And that was a topic that I've actually been talking with my students about recently. And you were talking about how people need to speak up more about it, and sort of become more aware. And then you listed a long list of things that you thought might help somebody who was depressed or, thinking of taking their own life. And, I guess my question for you would be that if there's no God and, there's no afterlife, then I guess I'm wondering why you would, be so concerned about the suicide rate.
Because I care about humans. I'm a humanist.
Okay, so, and so why would it be, I mean, would you use the word bad? Would you use the word sad? What, again, if it's just the end, right, and nothing happens after, and it was all meaningless from, cradle to grave and
I
nothing
don't
after.
think that it's meaningless.
Okay, but you're an absurdist. Is that correct?
Well, aspiring. I'm not sure if I qualify yet, but yeah, I'd like to be an absurdist, in the sense that I think that it kind of depends. I've heard you might be thinking of absurdist differently than I do. Can you define what you think absurdist means?
Yeah, I was just thinking absurdist is, like the philosophies of Soren Kierkegaard and Albert Camus, that said, pretty much, when you get down to it, life has no intrinsic value or meaning, and that you do your best to come up with it, that you do your best to make it meaningful, but that it ultimately has none. And I think they had come up with three alternatives. You either kill yourself, you find a transcendent source to bring meaning into life, or you just accept the insanity and resolve, that's just the way it is. You're just sort of going to accept it. And it's sort of like living in a state of madness. So those were the three choices that they gave. That's what comes to mind when I think of absurdists, are just those, because I don't know if you've read The Stranger by Camus or any of the literature by those guys.
I haven't. But I think you're right. I heard it put in a slightly different way. But yeah, I think that's ultimately right. I don't think that there is necessarily an ultimate purpose. Like, I don't think that there's an afterlife. But that doesn't mean that the life that we have isn't purposeful. It's just that I believe that just because there isn't an end, or that, sorry, I'm sorry, I said that wrong. Just because there isn't something after doesn't mean that what we have doesn't have meaning. And so,
and what does it draw meaning from, though? Where is it drawing the meaning from?
From us. We determine our own meaning. If I want to have this kind of effect on the world, then I assign that meaning to myself. If I want to have, absolutely no effect on the world, then I might become a recluse and make that my meaning. It just depends on how I want to be, and then I be that. And as far as, accepting, with things that happen in life, and, it's hard and it's really tough. It's about accepting it as it is what it is. And I'm just going to go with it because I don't have any other options. It's other than to go with it.
Okay. So then if people said, their meaning in life was going to be to kill themselves, then that would be their choice, right? It's up to them.
Well, yes.
Okay. All right.
But
so
my idea as a humanist is to prevent that from happening as long as I can, because I love people, because I'm a humanist. So, but really quick, I know that we're closing up. I just want to finish up with saying that an absurdist and a humanist does not equate atheist. The atheist is simply not accepting that claim, but I added those personally for me.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, ladies. Thank you for the exchange. We
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. And I'm getting all kind of questions in. I have several questions. I'm not going to be able to get to them all, but I do have several questions to throw at you. One comes from Trey Jadlow, and he says that this is for Jenna. Do you think that man-made logic? Let me see. Let me read it again. Do you think that man-made logic was discovered? He needs. Hey Trey, if you're out there, make sure you use punctuations, man. You got me over here babbling through your questions, bro. All right. So the question is, do you think logic is man-made, or you think it's a discovered principle?
I think that it is man-made in the sense that math was man-made. You know, it was used to describe how something works.
Okay. What do you say? What do you say, Scarlett?
I'm sorry. I thought that was just for Jenna.
Nah, I want you to go
Where
and
do
respond too.
logic
I should have
come from?
clarified that. My bad. My fault.
I was listening to her answer. I wasn't thinking. Where does logic come from? Was it
Yeah,
discovered?
is it man-made or discovered? I probably know your answer, but is it man-made or is it a discovered principle?
No, I say it's because God is logical. You know, our thinking can be patterned after His. In fact, we're commanded to do that in Scripture, to pattern our thinking after His. You know, we need to reflect His thinking, and so logical laws of logic come from Him. And He structured our cognitive faculties to be able to think logically as well.
Okay, this comes from YouTube by a guy named Alex Dowles. I'm not going to try to pronounce his last name. I don't want to destroy it. But his first name is Alex, and he said, this is for Scarlett. How can you verify the characteristics of God as you defined them?
Again, I'm going to go by the Scripture, which is self-attesting. Again, the possibility of the contrary is what I really like to get at when people say, why do you believe the Bible? Again, that's what the point I'm trying to make tonight is without the Bible, nothing makes sense. Okay, so I take the Bible to be direct, special revelation from God, and the characteristics that it gives God are straight from Him. Okay, it's His revelation to us. About who He is. And so we can, of course, know some things from creation. You know, we can know He's a personal God from creation. You know, I can look at that and know He created things so He can think. He makes choices. I can look at, you know, lots of things just in the natural world, and I can learn a lot about Him, but also through the Bible. So those two things, creation and revelation, special revelation or character of God.
Okay, any thoughts on that, Jenna?
No.
Okay. Moving on, this question is from Joshua Olson, and this is for you, Jenna. I'm interested to know Jenna's ultimate standard and the basis by which she assumes its validity.
My ultimate standard?
Yeah.
I don't know what he means by that.
I'm thinking he's talking about. I don't know exactly what he. I'm thinking he's talking about morals, or he's talking about logic. What is your ultimate standard and the basis by which you assume its validity?
I don't really understand the question. I'm sorry.
Okay. Scarlett, perhaps you understand that one. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm just going to say the ultimate standard is, again, the Bible, God's revealed Scripture to us. You know, He gave us His Word, you know, so that we could learn about the world and know about Him. You know, we can learn about God and what our duty is to Him. You know, without Scripture, you know, we have a very limited knowledge of God. And so I would say the ultimate standard is going to be the Bible.
Okay. All right, Scarlett, another question from Alex. Science has changed their presuppositions if they are proven to be wrong. Is there any possible evidence that would get you to conclude that the presuppositions of God was incorrect or are incorrect?
No. No.
Okay. What about you, Jenna? Any evidence, anything that will get you to believe that your position is incorrect?
Uh, I don't know.
Okay.
I think that God might know if he's omnipotent.
Okay. Okay. Let me see. All right. Question for Jenna. This is from Trey again. Is the universal goal of survival an unchanging moral code?
The universal goal of survival, an unchanging moral code.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that there is. Maybe.
And maybe it's an unchanging moral code. Okay. All right. Let me see. All right, it seems like the same folks. Joshua, Trey, and Alex. And Alex, one more from Alex, and this is your last question. This is your last question because it's getting late over where you guys are at. So let me get this through. So one more for Scarlett. Defining something as the origin of morals doesn't make it true. How can you demonstrate that the God you are describing, which you also describe as unknowable, is the origin of morality?
Can you say that one more time? Sorry, the
Okay.
wording of that one caught me off.
Okay, so defining something as the origin of morals doesn't make it true. How can you demonstrate that the God you're describing, which you also described as unknowable, is the origin of morality?
All right. Well, the moral law that he's given us in his word does correspond with the morals that we know. You know, it says he's written his law on our hearts. You know, his law in the word, his revelation actually aligns and corresponds with the laws that we have in our hearts. You know, he says, do not murder, and our consciences bear witness, right, that we are not supposed to take a life unjustly. So I think that's really, you know, it's a confirmation, right, that our consciences bear witness to the Bible. I hope that answers the question. Yeah.
Okay. Any thoughts, Jenna?
Mm-mm.
No thoughts. Okay. Cool. That is all the questions that we have. I was gonna throw some at you, but it looked like y'all have a bunch of them here, so I'm not gonna stress y'all out anymore with these questions. But so with that said, I'm gonna give you an opportunity for any closing statements, any closing remarks you might want to give, and give you a couple minutes for that. We'll start with Scarlett to go ahead and give some closing remarks.
Okay. I just had a couple of things I wanted to say, and really it's just I wanted to share the gospel, with anyone listening, and especially with you, Jenna. I know you came from the Catholic Church. I don't know what you heard there. I don't know what you grew up hearing because I'm not a Catholic. So I would just, if I could have the privilege of sharing the gospel with you as my conclusion, the good news of the gospel really comes after the bad news. Okay, and I mentioned the bad news to you earlier that we suppress the truth, that we have sinned before God and we suppress it, right? We hold it down because we don't want to face Him. But the good news is, right? The bad news been heard is that Son, Jesus in the flesh, He came to earth and He took our sins upon Himself on the cross. He took the punishment that should have fallen on us when He died on the cross. And it's only through Him that we can escape the judgment that's ahead for us. And so we've got to admit that we've sinned, that we've done wrong. And it's not going to come by going to any sort of confessional before a priest, or attending mass, or saying Hail Marys, or catechism classes. The Bible clearly says it's a gift, a free gift of God, not by works, not by having to do all different ritualistic things. Ephesians 2:8 tells us it's by the grace of God, right? It's by grace we've been saved through faith, not of ourselves. It's the gift of God. And so I just want to encourage you, to repent, turn to God so that your sins are wiped out. If you haven't done that, that you would repent and get right with God tonight.
All right. Cool. Thank you, Scarlett. Okay, Jenna, you're up. Get some closing remarks.
I guess the atheist claim is simply not accepting the theist claim. I have added some things in this talk that I believe personally, but that does not speak for all atheists. And I do want to say that the claim that I actually do believe in God, even though I'm telling you that I don't, is another claim that there's no evidence for. So I don't accept that either. Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Okay, cool. Thank you once again, ladies. Thank you for coming on and blessing the gospel truth with your presence. And, as I always do, I never put this disclaimer out there. I never did. And the previous guests or, debaters or interlocutors came on, and I never put this disclaimer out that you get one gift. When you first come on, you get a gift. After that, you ain't get nothing. Nah, you ain't get no more. You know what I mean? I never put that disclaimer out there. So all the guys, that came on before you two came on, and they received gifts, and I'm still sending some gifts out. I'm backdated. I got to send them out. So with that said, I would love to send you two gifts for your kindness and your graciousness. And for coming on and taking time out your busy schedule. I do appreciate both of you. So with that, I do want to send you gifts, and I will be contacting you after the show to get the information to get that gift to you. So if you can be patient with me, like I said, I'm a little back behind and sending out the gifts. So if you be patient with me, I will definitely get that out to you. And once again, thank you two for coming on and having such a wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jenna.
Thank you, Scarlett.
Thank you, Marlon.
All right, no problem. All right, we're going to close this out. All right, that is the gospel truth, y'all. That is the show for tonight. But, Scarlett killed it with the gospel. She killed it. She preached that gospel. But I'm going to piggyback off her. And I'm going to go over to Acts chapter 4, verses 11 and 12. And it says, "He is a stone which was rejected by you, the builders, by which became the chief cornerstone. And there is salvation in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven that has been given among men by which we must be saved." Talking about the man, Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior, our God, Jesus Christ. And, it's imperative that when we engage when we're believers and Christians and we're engaged in the culture of Christian truth and we're conversing with those who don't necessarily agree with, who disagree with our position, we have to preach that gospel. No matter what, we preach it with love, we preach it with kindness, so that they'll be able to hear what we're saying and not be distracted by our behavior issues. We want to be able to communicate the gospel in a way that they can hear it. So, when we're preaching this gospel, let's do it right. And Jesus Christ died on the cross, bled, resurrected for the forgiveness of sins, so that the wrath of God would not be on us. So that those who may believe will have eternal life. And I pray that for all those who don't believe in God, that the cross, that they will see the cross and see what it's there for, and see that Jesus Christ is the only way to salvation. But with that said, I want to rehash some of the upcoming shows that I have coming up. And on October 6th, so I'm coming at y'all tomorrow. Tomorrow I will have Miles Kettleson versus Taylor Gray, and they will be debating, can atheism account for objective morality? And that will be coming on at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. October 9th at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, I have an interview with Jay Hess, and he was a former Jehovah's Witness, and he'll be coming on sharing his testimony, and he'll be giving us a lowdown on some Jehovah's Witness doctrine, and he'll explain to us how to best evangelize them. October 15th, I have a Calvinism debate, or discussion, if you will. Aaron Fisher versus Kevin Thompson. They'll be discussing is total depravity biblical and is limited atonement biblical. And finally, October 16th at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, I have Anthony Rogers versus Armin Navabi, and they'll be discussing debating the value of Christianity. So there's a whole bunch of shows coming up. Be on the lookout. And once again, this is the Gospel Truth, where we're engaged in the culture of Christian truth, and that's through lesson, debate, and interviews. So be on the lookout for all the shows, all the updates that's coming out. And please, if you can, like and follow my page, The Gospel Truth, subscribe on YouTube, The Gospel Truth, and share this content, put it out there, because once again, the goal is to preach that gospel, and God has blessed us with an avenue to be able to do that in a very efficient manner. So if you can do that, I appreciate you, and may God bless you, and may God keep you. I'm out.